The dark web is a grim place, a pit where humanity's worst instincts thrive, and it's where I work. I'm what's known as a white hat, a kind of good guy hacker paid to tear down vile markets, map the trails that lead to the monsters hiding in the shadows, and shine a sort of light into that darkness. Most days I sit in front of my screens, the glow of my monitors the only light in my small, cluttered apartment as my fingers fly over the keyboard, piercing layers of encrypted filth and exposing secrets no one else dares to look for. It's my job, and it's not for the faint of heart, but I'm goddamn good at it. I've seen horrors beyond imagination, things no one should ever witness, but the case that haunts me started on a day like any other. A routine sweep led to a marketplace buried deep in the web's underbelly. It advertised human lives as commodities, young and old, with glossy images and cold descriptions. I'd seen it before, but this one had a different aura. Polished, professional, and insidiously quiet. A digital fortress, almost daring anyone to try to break in. I remember digging into its code and unraveling the layers of security, sort of like peeling an onion. It was very slow and grueling and frustrating work, and the site had a grotesque elegance to it, its defenses crafted by someone who knew what they were doing. But no system is impenetrable, and by the end of the third day I was in. The database was rather vast, with entries detailing victims, names, ages, photos, and chillingly precise descriptions of their usefulness. Each profile was a silent scream, a plea buried in ones and zeros, and I started extracting the data, piecing together patterns and names and connections, and as always, I logged everything meticulously, building a dossier that might help the authorities when I was done dismantling the site. Then I found her, a girl from the Philippines, and she couldn't have been more than 12. Her photo showed a child with wide, frightened eyes and a forced smile. Her profile was detailed in a way that made my stomach churn. And something about her entry stood out, though. An odd note in the metadata, a small breadcrumb someone had left behind. It was a payment log, and it didn't lead to a buyer. It led back to her family. I ran her name through every database I had access to, cross-referencing missing persons reports, social media posts, and news articles. And the trail was faint, but it was there. She disappeared months ago, her last known sighting in a small village. The local news barely mentioned it, and her parents never reported her missing. Instead, their lives had taken a very curious turn. I found pictures of them on Facebook, standing in front of a newly built house. Posts bragging about a blessing that had come their way. Expensive clothes, lavish parties, smiles plastered across their faces. It just didn't add up. Where does a poor family suddenly get that kind of money? The pieces clicked together, a grotesque puzzle I wish that I hadn't solved. They sold her. Their own flesh and blood, handed over to monsters for a better life. I stared at the screen, bile rising up in my throat ready to vomit, and it wasn't just the marketplace. It was the betrayal, the abandonment, the cold calculations that turned a child into currency. I've always kept my work professional, very detached, but this time I couldn't stop thinking about her. She wasn't just a name in a database anymore. She was a girl who had been discarded like trash, her life ripped apart by the people who were supposed to love her most. I dug deeper into her family. Bank records, private messages, anything I could find. Every transaction told a story, and the trail was very damning. The deposit that coincided with her disappearance, the gradual splurge on luxuries, they weren't just complicit, they were thriving off her suffering. The more I uncovered, the more I felt anger creeping in. My work had always been about dismantling systems, not judging individuals, but this felt very personal. Her image haunted me, that forced smile and the terror in her eyes. I just couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. I'd been compiling evidence for weeks, building a case that would hold up under scrutiny, and the authorities would take it from there, and that's how it always worked. But with each passing day, the thought of her family living in comfort while she suffered gnawed at me, They'd bought their happiness with her life. It was just monstrous. One night, as I sifted through the last of the data, I made a decision. I wouldn't just hand over the evidence and walk away. I would make them feel the weight of what they'd done. They couldn't be allowed to forget her, to erase her like she was nothing. I crafted an email, anonymous and untraceable, attaching photos of their daughter from the marketplace, blurred enough to protect her dignity, but unmistakable. I sent it to them with no words, just images. I wanted them to see her, to remember what they'd done. I'll never know if they opened it, but I imagined the guilt festering inside them like a rot. It wasn't justice, but it was something. The marketplace was gone within days, wiped clean from the dark web. My work there was done, and the authorities had the evidence they needed to start tracking that network, but her face has stayed with me, a ghost that I couldn't exorcise. I like to think that she's still alive somewhere, that the system I helped dismantle gave her a chance at freedom. But I know better. The dark web doesn't just let go of its victims easily. Still, I keep working, tearing down one monster at a time, because if I don't, who will?
This happened back when I was a kid. It was New Year's Eve, and I was staying up late because there was no school the next day. I think I was 12, and I lived with my parents and 2 siblings at the time. I remember that year was my first year that I was going to actually stay up until midnight to celebrate the new year. Every other year I had gone to bed well before midnight. So I was in the living room watching movies with my family, and the last movie of the night ended just before midnight. We turned the channel to one of those ones that shows the ball dropping in New York City. After that, my parents said that it was time for bed. My siblings and parents then went up to their bedrooms, and so did I. However, I wasn't really that tired. Like most kids, I loved playing video games, so I turned on my PlayStation, which I had in my bedroom. I remember that it got really warm in my room, and it was cold outside with it being the winter, so I went over and opened up the window a crack. I returned to my gaming chair and now heard the wind blowing from outside. But a short time later, after opening the window, I remember I heard a car door open and close. It sounded pretty close by, but I didn't pay it too much attention. However, we did live in a very quiet street, so I did notice it. Then I remember I heard footsteps entering the snow of our front yard. That's when I got curious and I walked over to my window. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor at the front side of the house, so I had a pretty good view. When I looked out of the window though, the person had just gone out of my sight. It sounded like whoever was there was going into our backyard for some reason, and I had no idea who would be at our house or why. I looked out to the street and saw the car. It was just a regular sedan, but I did not recognize it. I was curious, so I left my bedroom and went downstairs to look into the backyard. All the lights were off downstairs, so I was a little bit creeped out, but I quietly went to a back window, and when I looked, I saw this guy who I did not recognize standing around at the back end of the yard. He didn't really appear to be doing anything, but just kind of standing there. I also just barely saw him. The lighting was not very good, and after about a minute or so, the man turned and started walking back towards our house. When I saw this, I sprinted away from the window and went all the way back upstairs to my bedroom. I was freaked out and just hoped that the guy would get off of our property. But moments later, I heard a knock at the front door. Even though I was all the way upstairs, I heard it very clearly. The entire house was silent, with everyone having gone to bed. In that moment, I was really hoping that my brother, sister, or parents were awake and heard the knock, but apparently nobody did. After about 30 seconds of silence, there was another knock. I went over to my bedroom window and looked out. The man was standing there on the front step. I didn't dare go down and answer the door. I was considering waking my parents or siblings, but I kept a watch on the man instead. He stood around the door for a good 5 minutes at least. The longer he stood there, the creepier it seemed. Then he just walked away. He went back to his car and then drove off. It was very strange. Nothing else really strange like that happened again, and I never saw the guy after that. I told my parents about it the next day, and they were just as confused as I was. I still wonder about that sometimes. Who was that guy? Why did he go into our backyard? And why did he knock on the door? It's very weird. I was hosting a New Year's party at my house one year. I invited a few of my friends to come over to my apartment and hang out. It wasn't a big party or anything, just about 5 of us. My apartment is on the 2nd floor of the building, and even though it's just a 1-bedroom place, there's a decent amount of space there. So we were having a good time until somebody knocked on the door out of nowhere. Nobody else was supposed to be there, so we were all very confused. I was afraid at first that we were making too much noise and somebody was knocking to complain, but I didn't really think that was the case. We weren't being that loud, but I got up and walked over to the door. When I did, whoever had knocked was gone. There was nobody there. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, but there was still nothing. Then I went back inside and told my friends that there was no one there. We resumed talking to each other and having some snacks until whoever it was knocked on the door again. Now, I knew we were not being too loud, so I was confident that wasn't the problem, but I didn't know what else could be the cause of somebody knocking on my door multiple times. Once again, I got up and went over to the door, and once again, nobody was there. By now, I figured that it had to be a joke, or some prank that somebody was pulling. I didn't really know anyone in my building, so I wasn't sure why a prank like this would be pulled on me. But my friends and I got a laugh about it after figuring that's probably what it was. For maybe 30 minutes, there were no more knocks. Then, out of nowhere, we all heard it again. This time, I shot up and ran over to the door. I opened it and looked out. Just from the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a man sprinting around the corner and quickly went out of sight. I didn't get a good look at him, but I actually went after him running to the corner that he had gone around. But when I got there, I just barely saw that he went into the stairwell. I wasn't going to chase him around the building, so I gave up and I went back. I returned to my friends and I told them how I had chased the guy. Once again, we all got a good laugh about it. My friends stayed for a few more hours and there were no more knocks during the rest of the time that they were there. After my friends had all gone, it was really late. I started getting ready for bed, but when I was doing so, I heard a knock on my door again. It seemed different now. There hadn't been a knock in hours, and it was much later, plus my friends weren't here, so it seemed creepy. I was surprised that the guy was still doing the prank, if that's what it was. Then there was another knock. I thought that it was maybe one of my friends at that point. Possibly someone forgot something at my place, because the prankster had always only knocked once, so this was unusual. So I walked over to the door. Before opening it, I looked through the peephole though. There was a man standing there who looked like the guy who kept knocking before. Of course, I didn't know for sure. I knew I could open the door and catch him, but he didn't seem to want to run away. He was standing there in a way that he wanted to go inside my apartment or something. He was not in a position to run. I thought that possibly he was going to apologize for pranking me earlier. Still, for some reason, I decided not to answer the door. After a little while, he walked away. Then I went to bed. The next morning after I woke up, I saw police cars parked outside the building from my window. I came to find out that they were there because a man who lived in the building had been attacked. A guy had knocked on his door and then attacked him when he answered it. Thankfully, the man was able to fight the guy off and he left without injuring him. When I heard that, I realized it was probably the same guy who had knocked on my door. I'm really glad that I didn't answer for him. Last year, I was invited to a New Year's Eve party at my friend Alex's house, who is also my coworker. I've worked at the company for roughly 5 years, and Alex has been there a little bit longer than that, so I know most of the people around the office, but Alex is probably my best friend at work, so I was looking forward to the party. He lives not too far away from me in a neighborhood that I would describe as pretty typical. It's a house that has a living room, dining room, kitchen, and bathroom on the main floor. There's also a basement and upstairs as well. The party was at 7 o'clock at night, and it went all the way until midnight. When I got there, there was already some other people at Alex's house. Almost 10 people from work showed up, and several other friends that Alex had were there, but I didn't know them. I remember that at one point, maybe around 9 o'clock at night, most of the people were in the dining room playing a game. However, a few of us were in the living room, including me, because I wasn't playing the game that round. There was then a knock at the front door, which happened to be right behind me. Most people didn't hear it because there was some music playing and the TV was on. I turned around and opened it up and saw a woman standing there who I did not know. She said that she was there for the party, so I let her in, assuming she was one of Alex's friends. I introduced myself to her briefly, and I remembered that after she said hi, she walked past me and went towards the kitchen. After that, I just went back to watching TV in the living room with my coworkers. Over the next few hours, I played a board game with others in the dining room. When it approached midnight, everybody gathered in the living room for the countdown. Then, after it became midnight and the new year, people started to leave. It was getting late after all, but luckily we didn't have work the next day for the New Year's holiday. I remember that I went back into the dining room though and played another board game with some people. During this entire time, I never saw the woman again. I didn't realize it at the time though. I had just completely forgot about her. So by 1 a.m. everyone had left and I was about to go home as well. It was Alex, another coworker, and me that were there. And after the other coworker left, I stayed back to help Alex clean. I wasn't planning on it, but I saw the place was kind of a mess and I wasn't that tired, so I figured I'd help out. So I remember that I was in the living room and Alex was in the dining room when suddenly we heard this noise. It was coming from the back side of the house, probably near the kitchen, closer to Alex. When I heard the noise, I looked over at him, and he was far away from what it could have been. The noises continued though. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but I saw Alex quickly move into the living room and he had a panicked look on his face. He whispered to me that somebody was climbing through his window. He scrambled past me to the coat closet by the front door. Alex then took out an old baseball bat that he had in there. I heard whoever had entered his house was in the kitchen now, but we could not see them from where we were. It was completely around the corner. There was a doorway that led right to it, but the door was closed. I was very confused and had no idea why somebody was breaking into Alex's house. But Alex started to walk over towards the guy. He stood on the other side of the door. We hadn't heard any more movements from the guy since he had entered the house. Before Alex opened up the door to the kitchen though, he called out to the guy. Alex yelled that he had a weapon and the guy better leave now or else. When he said that, there was silence for a moment. Then a man's voice yelled from the other side that he also had a weapon. Alex and I didn't know what this man was referring to, if he had a gun or what, but we didn't want to take a chance. Instead, Alex and I just took off running upstairs. We both went into his bedroom and locked the door behind us and called the police. While we waited there, we couldn't really hear anything from downstairs. Alex still had the bat though in case the guy went upstairs. We quietly talked back and forth trying to figure out what was going on. After probably like 10 minutes, we were able to hear that the police arrived. When we went back downstairs, the man was gone. The house was empty, but the back window was open. Several items were stolen though. I stuck around to answer questions from the police with Alex. When they asked if anything strange had happened, that's when I remembered the woman. I described her to Alex, asking who she was, and Alex said that he had no idea. He said he didn't know anybody matching that description. It would have been easy for her though because it was pretty busy at the house. I think that maybe she was working with whoever broke in. Perhaps she opened the window for the guy or something. It's really strange, and I don't know exactly what happened there. With New Year's coming up, I decided to write my own experience that occurred. It all started 3 years ago. It was New Year's Eve, and I was hanging out with some friends. We went to a bar in the city, and we're just hanging out. As you could imagine, most of the places were pretty busy, and at around midnight, the bar that I was in was especially crowded. My friends and I left the bar that we were at to go to another one. When we were walking down the sidewalk, I noticed on my phone that I had a new text. It was from a number that I did not know, and the text just said hi. Like I said, I didn't know who it was, so I did not text back. I stayed out with my friends for another hour or two. When I got home at about 2 in the morning, I got another text from the number again. It said, "Answer me," in all capitals with exclamation points as well. I texted back asking who it was, but I got no response for the rest of the night. The next morning, the number simply texted me a thumbs down. I was very confused, but figured that it must be a wrong number or something. I didn't really give it any more thought after that. The very next year, on New Year's Eve, I did not go out with friends, but was hanging out at a friend's place. Once more, shortly after midnight, I got a text message. I didn't even remember the text from the previous year at all, except when I saw the new text that I got, the previous ones were there as well, and then I remembered. Once more, the text said hi at like 12:01. I responded quickly this time, asking who it was that was texting me. The number did not text me back for an hour. When it did, the person simply said, "I hate you." I was even more confused now. I couldn't think of anybody that would be texting me that. I also had all my contacts in my phone, so it wasn't somebody that I knew. Still, I brought it up with some friends, thinking that it might be somehow a joke. Nobody seemed to know anything about it though. After that, I didn't text the number back, and they didn't text me anything either. That brings us to last year. Once more, I had forgotten all about the number texting me either year. On New Year's last year, I was out with friends again. We went to some bars in the city again. I didn't really go on my phone much, but when I got home, I looked at it. At 12:01, there had been a text sent to me from the same number saying hi again. I texted back asking who it was and why they were texting me every New Year's. They never responded. I haven't heard from them since. But now New Year's is coming up again, and this would be the 4th year in a row that they text me if they do. For some reason, whoever this is remembers to text me every year right after 12 o'clock on New Year's. I can't imagine that it's some kind of a prank, but I have no idea who would be doing this or why. We'll see if it happens again this year.